The familiar sting of betrayal shot through her, bringing a scowl to her face. It was the same old story. Trust no one. No one would willingly help her. They all had ulterior motives. How could she have been so blind? Looking back, she could see the signs. She had seen them, but she had chosen to ignore them. Now she was paying the price. There was a bitter taste in her mouth as she realized the gravity of her situation. What was she going to do now? Her journey had not been easy. Even as a child, she had been underestimated, dismissed as just another spoiled rich kid. But Jessa had proved them wrong. She had climbed her way to the top, clawing her way out of the suffocating grip of her parents' gilded cage. Yet somehow along the way, she had lost herself. She was no longer the determined young girl who had dreamed of a different life. She was now feared, respected, called the Shadow Queen. Some whispered tales of her ruthlessness, her uncanny ability to predict her enemies' moves before they even made them. People called her a monster, a force of nature, and those names had become her currency, her shield, and her weapon. But now she found herself stripped bare, vulnerable in a world that offered her no mercy. She needed allies, people who wouldn't betray her in a heartbeat. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Who could she turn to? Who wouldn't use her as a pawn in their own game? The thought of relying on someone filled her with dread. The idea of being betrayed again, of being tossed aside like yesterday's news, was unbearable. But she was running out of options. She was trapped in a labyrinth of her own making, surrounded by enemies, and her once impenetrable armor was now shattered. She walked, her heels clicking on the marble floor, echoing her turmoil. The grand halls of her mansion were a testament to her success, yet they also mocked her solitude. Every room was a mausoleum of memories, each holding its own secrets, its own pain, and she was the curator of this museum of sorrow. She had built this life, brick by painful brick, and now it was crumbling around her. As she walked, shadows danced at her feet, mimicking her own internal darkness. The portraits on the walls seemed to stare back at her, judging her, whispering tales of her rise and imminent fall. She had become the very thing she had once sought to escape, a puppet master, controlling everyone except herself. Outside, the city throbbed with life, unaware of the turmoil within its most prominent citizen. Cars honked, sirens wailed, laughter echoed. The city was her domain, yet she felt like an outsider looking in. She had conquered the city, but in doing so, she had forgotten what it meant to be human. The irony was not lost on her. She had everything: power, wealth, respect, and yet she felt empty. She had traded her soul for success, and now she was reaping the whirlwind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Jessa found herself drawn to the one place she hadn't visited in years. It was an old park near her childhood home, a place filled with ghosts of laughter and innocence. The rusty swing set creaked in the evening breeze, a lonely melody that echoed her own loneliness. She sat on a nearby bench, the cold metal pressing against her skin, grounding her in the present. The city's clamor faded into the background, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of twilight. The tranquility was a stark contrast to the chaos that had been her life, and for a moment she felt a sliver of peace. Suddenly she heard a familiar voice cutting through the stillness. "Jessa, is that you?" Startled, she turned to find the source. And there he was, Finn standing before her, his silhouette framed by the last rays of the setting sun. Time had been kind to him. He looked older now, more defined. His features were sharper, his eyes deeper, but it was still the same Finn she had met all those years ago. He was no longer the wide-eyed kid who talked about stars and dreams. He was a man now, strong and sure of himself. The sight of him brought a rush of emotions to the surface. Betrayal, anger, confusion. Why was he here? Had he come to gloat, to rub her failures in her face? "What are you doing here, Finn?" she asked, her voice raspy from disuse. "I saw you at the park. I thought we could talk." He took a step closer and she recoiled, instinctively putting distance between them. She knew she shouldn't let him in, but she couldn't help herself. She had missed him more than she cared to admit. "You haven't changed, have you, Jessa?" he asked softly, his gaze intense. "You're still running from yourself." His words pierced through her defenses, striking a chord of shame. He was right, as he usually was. But why did it hurt so much to hear it? Why did his words resonate with such painful accuracy? "Why do you care?" she retorted, anger lacing her voice. It's none of your business what I do, because I care about you, Jessa. I always have, and I'm worried. Her breath hitched. She had never heard him call her name like that, with such warmth, such affection. It sounded foreign, almost alien. Don't, she whispered, her voice cracking. She couldn't bear the vulnerability that threatened to spill over. Finn took a step back, his expression softening with understanding. He didn't press her, didn't push her to open up, didn't demand answers. Instead, he simply sat down on the bench beside her, leaving a comfortable space between them. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rustling leaves and the distant city sounds. It was a strange feeling, this silence. Usually she craved it, relished the solitude, but now it was different. The silence was heavy with unspoken words, with emotions too raw to express. As the minutes ticked by, Jessa felt a change within her, a stirring of emotions long dormant. Tears pricked at her eyes, threatening to spill over. She blinked them back, refusing to let him see or break. She had shown him nothing but hostility, and the last thing she wanted was pity. But the dam within her was crumbling, and she could feel herself slipping away. Jessa, Finn said quietly, reaching out to touch her arm. His fingers lingered, sending shivers down her spine. She flinched, startled by the unexpected sensation. "Let me help you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me help you put the pieces back together." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "I don't need your help," she choked out, her voice trembling. "I'm fine." But Finn wasn't convinced. He reached out again, this time cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You're not fine, Jessa, but you can be. You just have to let me help you." His words were a balm to her raw emotions, soothing the wounds that had festered for so long. The touch of his hands was electric, sending warmth through her veins that had nothing to do with the summer night. In that moment, she forgot about the city, her enemies, her fears. All that mattered was the feeling of his hands on her face, the sincerity in his eyes, and, without thinking, without planning, she did the most unexpected thing she had ever done. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, letting the dam break. When she opened them again, she saw a universe in those pools of amber. She saw kindness, compassion, understanding. She saw Finn. Their eyes locked, and she knew she was lost. This was not the ending she had envisioned. She had planned to protect herself, to keep him at arm's length. But something had shifted. The walls she had built so carefully were crumbling. The shadows beneath were rising, but they weren't hers anymore. They belonged to Finn. He was the new Shadow Queen.